That's not the number he agreed to, Mr. Crane. The voice was so low that Wesley Crane nearly missed it beneath the hiss of the climate control system and the faint scrape of his own leather chair against the polished marble floor of the 34th floor boardroom at the top of One Harbor Square in Toronto. He had one hand already on the back of his chair, his reading glasses folded and tucked into the breast pocket of his jacket, a Mont Blanc pen uncapped in his right hand. He was 67 years old. He had executed somewhere north of 6,000 contracts in 41 years of practice, and he had been approximately 90 seconds from signing the largest transaction Crane Development Partners had ever assembled. He turned slowly. The man who had spoken was standing near the tall glass credenza along the south wall, half obscured by the spray of white hydrangeas that someone on the facilities team set out in the boardroom every Monday morning without exception. He was perhaps 70, maybe older, in the dark gray uniform of the building maintenance crew, with a mop cart parked at an angle behind him and a folded cleaning cloth held in both hands. He had the posture of a man who had spent decades learning to make himself invisible in rooms like this one. Wesley recognized him after a moment. His name was Earl Drummond. He had worked in the maintenance division of One Harbor Square for 22 years, and Wesley had passed him in the corridor and in the service elevator more times than he could count. 2 Decembers ago, Wesley had given him a bottle of scotch from the case that sat on the credenza at Christmas, and Earl had accepted it with the brief, quiet thank you of a man who had learned long ago exactly how to receive a gift from the person who owned the building he cleaned. Wesley had never once asked him how he took his coffee. "What did you say?" Wesley asked. Earl Drummond did not look away. There was something in his face that was not quite fear and not quite resolve, but occupied the uncomfortable space between them. The expression of a man who had already weighed the cost of speaking and arrived at the conclusion that the cost of staying quiet was heavier. "That's not the number he agreed to, sir," Earl said again. His voice was steady. "The man in the blue suit. The one who was just in here setting up. He was on his phone when I came in to check the credenza. He didn't see me because I came through the service entrance," he said. Earl paused and his hands tightened on the cloth. "He said the cap on Schedule C is the one that matters. He said once you sign, the money moves." And then he laughed, sir. Not a good kind of laugh. Wesley Crane set the pen down on the leather blotter in front of him. He did it with the deliberate care of a man who had learned over 4 decades in commercial law and real estate development that the fastest movements in rooms like this one were almost always the costliest. He was the founding partner of Crane Development Partners, a Toronto-based development firm whose projects spanned 7 provinces and whose current portfolio was valued at just over $3 billion. He had been audited, arbitrated, litigated against twice in federal court, and in 2009 the subject of a hostile restructuring attempt that had taken him 14 months and most of his hair to defeat. He had never been warned about anything by the man who mopped his floors. He looked at the closed door at the far end of the room. Beyond it, in the walnut-paneled anteroom, Spencer Mott, his chief operating officer of 17 years, was pouring himself a coffee from the silver service and speaking in the relaxed, unhurried manner of a man who considered the next 15 minutes a formality. Wesley turned back to Earl. "Come here," he said quietly. "Don't be concerned. Walk slowly. Tell me exactly what he said, not the general idea. The exact words, if you remember them." Earl Drummond moved away from the credenza, the way he moved through every room in that building, without sound, without urgency, as though the space itself did not quite register his presence. He stopped a few feet from Wesley, and did not come closer than that. He said, "The old partner hasn't read a deal document himself in 3 years. He said, once it's signed, we're clear." Those were his words, sir. I remembered them because I knew right away they were the kind of words a person shouldn't let go of. Wesley Crane stood very still at the head of the long table. He was aware, in the precise and particular way he had learned to be aware of certain things across 40 years of closing rooms, that the man in front of him was telling the truth. He was also aware, in that same precise way, that the man in front of him was correct. Wesley had not read a deal document himself, not cover to cover, not since the winter of 2021, when his optometrist had found something behind his left eye that turned out to be manageable, but had, for a period of 8 difficult months, made extended reading genuinely painful. Spencer Mott had, with the quiet solicitousness of a long, trusted colleague, offered during that period to prepare a condensed executive brief for every major transaction. Wesley had been grateful. He had told his wife about it over dinner as evidence of the understated loyalty that defined the best professional relationships of a career. He had been signing on Spencer's summaries ever since. Earl, he said, and the name came out with a formality that surprised him slightly. He was not certain in that moment that he had ever used it before. How long ago did you hear this? About 20 minutes back. I came through the service door to check the water setup before your 9 o'clock. Did he see you at any point? No, sir, I don't believe so. I went back out the way I came in. Wesley looked at him for a long moment. He had made his livings reading faces across tables, and he had come to believe over many years that a face under genuine pressure told a more reliable truth than any document he had ever been handed. Earl Drummond's face was calm in the particular way of a man who had already paid the internal cost of deciding and was simply waiting for the decision to be acted upon. Thank you, Wesley said. I want you to wait in the service corridor and keep the door open a crack. I'll come for you if I need you to repeat what you told me to someone else. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Earl Drummond took his mop cart and moved back through the service entrance without a sound. The door clicked shut behind him. Wesley checked his watch. He had 12 minutes before Spencer would walk back through the main door with the closing binder and the 2 outside board members. He used every one of them. The first thing he did was pull out his reading glasses, the ones his wife had made him promise to carry, the ones he almost never used in meetings because he disliked what they communicated about him. And he opened the working copy of the closing binder that Spencer had placed in front of his chair that morning, and he turned to Schedule C. Schedule C of the Halcourt Property Portfolio Acquisition Documents was, on its face, a standard environmental indemnification and liability allocation clause. It described, in the compressed and deliberate language that transactional lawyers use when they want a document to appear thorough while remaining difficult to follow at speed, the allocation of remediation responsibilities at 4 commercial sites in the portfolio, 2 in Ontario, 2 in British Columbia, that had been flagged during due diligence as carrying historical contamination risk. Wesley had negotiated those liabilities personally. He remembered the conference call in February, the particular afternoon when Halcourt's counsel had agreed to cap the assumed liability at $9.5 million, subject to a 48-month survival period after closing. He remembered writing the number on the back of a gas receipt because it was the only paper in reach. The number in Schedule C of the binder in front of him was $95 million. Wesley read it 3 times. He held the binder very still. He was aware, in the specific manner of a man whose career had been built on the precise meaning of numbers in documents, that a decimal point does not relocate itself. A decimal point in a Schedule C indemnification clause in a closing binder that had passed through the review of the chief operating officer of a firm the size of Crane Development Partners had been moved by a person who intended it to be moved, and who had reasonable cause to believe that the person signing would not look closely enough to catch it. He closed the binder. He replaced it in exactly the position Spencer had left it in. He straightened the pen beside it. Then he walked to the small credenza panel on the east wall, a recessed intercom that Spencer did not know existed, because Spencer had not been there the year the building was renovated and the system was installed. And he pressed it. "Valerie," he said. The voice on the other end belonged to Valerie Prescott, who had been his executive assistant for 23 years and who was at that moment seated at her desk 12 feet from Spencer Mott. She answered in the pleasantly neutral voice she used when she was being observed. "Yes, Mr. Crane." "Valerie, please listen carefully and don't react to what I'm about to ask you. I need 3 things done in the next 10 minutes. First, please walk to the ladies' room, and once you're inside, call Josephine Kwok on her mobile, not her office line, her mobile. Tell her I need her in the boardroom immediately with a laptop, and whoever she has available from the forensic review team. Tell her to use the service corridor on the east side." "Yes, Mr. Crane." "Second, I need you to call Randall Syme in legal and ask him to retrieve the sealed original of the Halcourt closing package from the document vault on the 28th floor, the courier copy that arrived last Thursday. He is to bring it to the boardroom himself and not speak to anyone in the finance wing on his way up. Tell him the seal is not to be broken until he is in my presence." "Yes, Mr. Crane." "Third, when you return to your desk, please offer Mr. Mott another coffee. Ask him how the drive-in was this morning. I need 8 minutes." There was a pause, the particular pause Wesley had heard from Valerie Prescott perhaps 3 times in 23 years. The pause of a person who has understood, without being told, exactly what she is being asked to help contain. "I can do that, Mr. Crane." "Thank you, Valerie." He set the handset down. He stood behind his chair with his hands resting on the leather, and he looked at the closed door, and he thought for the first 30 seconds about a man he had hired 17 years ago out of a mid-tier advisory firm. A man whose 2 daughters he had watched grow up at firm Christmas parties, whose wife he had sat beside at the gala 3 years running, who had once appeared in Wesley's office doorway during a difficult quarter in 2018 and said simply, "Tell me what you need, and I'll handle it." Wesley had thought at the time that it was the best thing a colleague had ever said to him. He thought about that for 30 seconds. Then he spent the next 30 seconds reading Schedule C a third time, slowly with the glasses he had avoided wearing in professional rooms for 4 years, and he confirmed that the number was $95 million, and that it had been that number for however long this version of the document had existed. Then he spent the remaining time preparing his face. The service corridor door opened first. Josephine Kwok came through it with a silver laptop under her arm and 2 members of her forensic review team behind her. She was the head of internal audit at Crane Development Partners, and she crossed the room without speaking, because she had worked for Wesley for 11 years. And she had learned that when he arranged for her to arrive through the service entrance before assigning, the correct response was to arrive, open the laptop, and wait. "Josephine," Wesley said quietly, "pull up the working file for the Halcourt acquisition, the version circulating internally for the last 3 weeks. Schedule C, the environmental liability cap." Her fingers moved. "$95 million," she said. "Pull the version from 6 weeks ago." She pulled it. She looked up. $9.5 million. When did it change? She checked the audit trail. Her face did the specific thing that the faces of people who are very difficult to surprise do when they have just been surprised. "This past Friday," she said. "Checked out and back in from Mr. Mott's workstation, 7:14 in the evening." Wesley nodded once. He had known, in the way that a man knows certain things once the shape of them has become clear, that she was going to say something close to that. He had needed to hear it said aloud in a room with witnesses. He told Josephine what would happen in the next few minutes. He told her to remain at the credenza and say nothing until he asked her a direct question, and that when he asked her, he wanted the answer she had just given him, timestamp included. Randall Syme arrived through the service corridor 90 seconds later with the sealed Halcourt binder held in both hands. Wesley told him to stand at the credenzas and not to break the seal until instructed. The main boardroom door opened at 9:59. Spencer Mott came in first, carrying the working binder in his left hand with the practiced ease of a man who had carried closing binders into rooms for the better part of 2 decades. Behind him came the 2 outside directors, Brenda Ng and Clifton Park, both of whom Wesley had known for more than 15 years, and both of whom he had come in the last 8 minutes to the reluctant, private conclusion that he would need to reassess. Spencer was 3 steps into the room before he registered Josephine Kwok at the credenza. His expression did not change. This was the first thing Wesley noticed, and it was the thing he would remember most clearly afterward. Not the number on the page, not the timestamp, but the 3/4 second in which Spencer Mott absorbed an unexpected variable and produced no visible response to it. A man facing an ordinary complication flinches. Spencer Mott did not flinch. He smiled. He looked at Wesley. "Good morning," he said. "Ready to make history?" "Nearly," Wesley said. "Come in, close the door." Spencer closed it. He moved toward his seat. He set the binder down with the small, unhurried grace of a man who believed the next 15 minutes were already decided. Wesley remained standing. He rested both hands on the top of his chair and looked down the length of the table. "Spencer," he said, "before we begin, I'd like to ask you one question. In the closing binder in front of you, Schedule C, the environmental indemnification provision, what is the cap on assumed liability at the 4 flagged sites?" Spencer Mott did not open the binder. He looked at Wesley across the polished table with the measured steadiness of a man who had prepared for this question, or one close enough to it. $9.5 million, he said, as negotiated with Halcourt in February. Wesley nodded slowly. "Josephine," he said. Josephine Kwok turned the laptop to face the table. "The cap in the working binder circulated by Mr. Mott's office," she said, "is $95 million. The change was made from Mr. Mott's workstation this past Friday at 7:14 p.m. Spencer Mott's face held its expression for 1 beat longer than a face naturally holds any expression. Then something shifted behind his eyes. Not guilt exactly, and not fear, but the specific recalibration of a man who has just realized that the room he believed he was managing is no longer the room he is in. He looked at the credenza where Randall Syme was standing with the sealed Halcourt binder. He looked back at Wesley. There must be a version discrepancy, he said. If outside counsel sent a revised draft on Friday and their changes introduced. Randall, Wesley said quietly. Randall Syme broke the courier seal and opened the original binder. He read aloud from Schedule C in a flat, careful voice. $9.5 million, aggregate cap, 48-month survival period post-closing. He closed the binder. Spencer Mott did not speak. Wesley looked at him across the table and spoke in the same quiet, unhurried voice he had used in every room like this one for 40 years, because he had learned very young that the men who raise their voices in closing rooms are always the men who have already lost. Spencer, he said, I want to tell you 3 things. The first is this. The reason I know what is in Schedule C this morning is not because I read the binder. I have not read a full closing document myself since the winter of 2021, as you correctly observed on the telephone in this room this morning. Spencer Mott's face changed. It changed in the particular way that faces change when a person understands in one clean instant that the ground they believed they were standing on has been somewhere else entirely. His eyes moved, slowly, then with the sudden focus of a man doing arithmetic, toward the service corridor door. And he understood. The second thing, Wesley said, is that the person who heard you on that telephone will not be named in any proceeding that follows from this meeting. His name will not appear in any filing. If I learn at any point that you or your counsel have made any effort to identify or contact him, I will devote whatever professional capacity I have remaining to ensuring that the full account of what you have done reaches every person in this industry who has ever shaken your hand. That is not a threat. It is a description of what will happen. Spencer Mott said nothing. The third thing, Wesley said, is that you are going to stand up now and walk out through that main door and go directly to your office, where Josephine and her team are going to join you. You are not going to touch your computer or your telephone. The RCMP Commercial Crime Section was contacted at 9:47 this morning, and 2 officers are currently on their way to the executive floor. You will leave this building through the lobby in the ordinary way because the people who have worked here for a long time do not deserve to carry the image of any other kind of exit. That is not a courtesy. I am extending to you. It is one I am extending to them. Spencer Mott stood. He left the binder where it was. He left his coffee. He walked the length of the boardroom without looking at anyone, pushed through the main door into the anteroom where Valerie Prescott was standing at her desk with the composed expression she had maintained for 23 years. And he kept walking toward the 2 officers in plain clothes who were waiting beside the elevator bay. The door closed behind him. Wesley stood behind his chair for a long moment. He looked at the sealed original on the credenza and the modified binder on the table. He looked at Josephine and Randall and the 2 outside directors, whose faces told him everything he needed to know about the conversations that would follow. Then he walked to the service corridor door and opened it. Earl Drummond was waiting exactly where Wesley had asked him to wait, mop handle resting against the wall, hands folded in front of him. Come in, Wesley said. There's something I want to say in front of other people, and you should be here to hear it. Earl came in. He stood just inside the doorway and did not look around the room with any particular curiosity or discomfort, because he had been in this room hundreds of times before without anyone noticing. Wesley spoke to the room. This is Earl Drummond, he said. He has worked in this building for 22 years. This morning he heard something he had no obligation to tell me. He understood that telling me might create difficulties for him. He told me anyway. I want everyone present to know that. He looked at Earl. I owe you a debt, Wesley said. I'm not going to embarrass you by naming a figure in this room, but I'll be calling you in the next few days, and I'd like you to bring whoever you'd like to bring with you to that conversation. Earl Drummond looked at him. He gave a small, single nod, the nod of a man who had not expected to be in a boardroom that morning and was choosing, in the circumstances, to meet the moment with the same quiet steadiness with which he met most things. That's all right, Mr. Crane, he said. I only did what needed doing. He picked up his mop cart and moved back toward the service corridor, then he stopped, without turning around. You might want to recap that pen, he said. It's been sitting open a while. Wesley looked down at the Mont Blanc on the leather blotter. He picked it up. He capped it. He almost smiled. What came after moved with the unhurried weight of institutions that have been built to absorb exactly this kind of blow. The RCMP Commercial Crime Unit, working with Josephine Kwok's forensic team, traced the liability structure through a numbered company registered in Alberta and 2 interrelated holdings in Delaware. The scheme had been running, in smaller forms, for 4 years. The total amount Spencer Mott had positioned to extract across 3 transactions, Halcourt being the largest, was just under $60 million. None of it had moved yet. Spencer Mott was charged on a Tuesday in October. He pleaded guilty the following spring and was sentenced to 9 years. He was 54 years old at the time of sentencing. The 2 outside directors resigned from the board in November by letter. The evidence placed them at the boundary between negligence and complicity, and in the end the Crown did not pursue charges. Wesley replaced them both, and he was more careful the second time about what he was looking for. The Halcourt acquisition closed in January at the correct figure. The 4 flagged sites performed within projections across the following 3 years. Earl Drummond was offered a role as liaison between facilities management and the executive office, a position that had not previously existed and that was designed at some care and thought around the specific things he was already quietly doing. The salary that came with it allowed him to stop the second job he had been working on weekends for 11 years. He accepted on the condition that he could still do his own rounds of the 34th floor on Monday mornings, because he said he liked the quiet up there before the week started. No one who understood anything about what had happened that particular Monday morning saw any reason to argue with him about it. Wesley Crane worked for 6 more years before he stepped back from day-to-day operations. He spent a considerable portion of those years building into the firm's governance structure a set of provisions that made it impossible, going forward, for any single officer to prepare an executive summary for any transaction above a certain threshold without independent legal review. He did not discuss publicly what had prompted those provisions. Anyone who had been in the building long enough already knew. There are stories told about the great tower offices along Bay Street, that the men behind those windows understand everything that happens inside their buildings. That power is self-protecting, that the people who built those rooms cannot be deceived within them. It is rarely true. The truth of those buildings is most often known by the people who arrive before sunrise and leave after dark, and move through the marble corridors in soft-soled shoes, carrying out the small, reliable work that holds the building together. The people who have been made invisible for so long, they have almost forgotten that invisible is not the same as absent. Learn the name of the person who cleans your floor. Not because it is polite, though it is, but because that person sees what you cannot see from where you sit. They have been watching the room long before you arrived in it. The quietest voice in any building is sometimes also the most honest one, and sometimes all it takes to stop something that has been building for years is one person, with nothing to gain and everything to risk, who decides that silence is the more expensive choice.